So at some point, without even realizing, I became a researcher. And it's like, okay, I'm a researcher now. I do this now.
Julian, how did you get into user experience?
Well, kind of through the window, I would say. I started off as a product manager, actually, in a really small startup. And at some point, I was really into this, going to Steve Blank's get out of the building, customer discovery, customer development, talk to people, test your ideas, learn more. And at some point I started doing that, and I noticed, okay, maybe I could be better at this, because I noticed I kind of like realized I had many limitations in that regard. It's like, yeah, I don't really know how to interview people. So I started to buy books and get into that, and one thing led to the other. So at some point, it's like, yeah, there's this thing called UX, and there's something called research that at some point was like included within the whole package, not as UX research per se. So I started getting close to that, and I bought books on how to interview. I mean, I'm talking about like Steve Portigal's interviewing users, Erica Hall. Like we're going like back to the first, so to say, classics now. We can say classics, right? It's like
They're
2024. Yeah.
excellent resources. I've read their books as well. They're definitely go-to books. Yes.
So at the same time I was doing that, I got the book Sprint. So I got
Mhm.
into facility. So it was like UX and facilitation came into my life at the same time. So I kind of like got into that. And then I moved to Berlin. I was living in Argentina at the time. I moved to Berlin and I started working with service designers. And then I was doing a mix of facilitation, and then they helped me improve my research skills together with what I was learning through books and so on. So at some point, without even realizing, I became a researcher. And it's like, okay, I'm a researcher now. I do this now.
I love it. You
And
just fell into it, right?
yeah, and it's been already 8 years, quite some
S-
time now.
Wow, that's great. So, Julian, talk a little bit more about that connection between facilitation and UX researcher.
Well, at some point, I started, I think, naturally connecting both. At the beginning, they were not so obviously connected to me, because when I was working with this group of service designers, mostly was connected to design sprints, mostly, or like parts of the sprint. For those who maybe are familiar with that, you have different days. You have 4 days or 5 days, depending on which version you pick. So maybe I was doing one day of that, and one day and the testing. So at some point, I started just picking up the exercise and say, okay, fine, I just do this exercise here. Or, oh, this could be really good if we just connected it with the insights we got from the research. So at some point, I started mixing both, and I started implementing it into the work because I really liked it and I thought it was super useful and saved me a lot of time. I started kind of being like, push them everywhere. We need to do a kickoff. Why don't we do a workshop? Then after a research project, okay, why don't we do a workshop to maybe do some crazy aids on the ideas that we got? So, this kind of things. And at some point, it became kind of another tool in the toolkit for me. It's a thing that can apply to everything at some point. So I apply to mostly to research, but I ended up using it all everywhere, even in my personal life.
Oh, tell me about that. How are you using facilitation in your personal life?
Well, for example, at some point we were organizing a holiday with friends that I facilitated at the workshop. I was also helping a friend change or reframe how she was positioning for her career, and not a people's person. And I don't know about like talent acquisition and so on, but it's like, okay, you're like you are the protagonist here, so I help you sort out your ideas through a little workshop. So these kind of things, very basic workshop still, but they help you organize the group and clear out the dynamics. And it's also fun if you do it the right way. It's super fun.
Yeah. Were you using a digital whiteboard for your personal facilitation?
Nah, not really. That's super old school with the post-its and everything on the wall. So
But people
so
like that, right? They like that activity and that movement of those old school physical notepads, right? Or sticky
yeah,
note.
yeah. Don't get me wrong. Miro, FigJam, all these tools are great, and they're super convenient, and especially if you have a team that is like in multiple locations and so on, it's super useful. But yeah, when you're in person, it's a different vibe. When you do a workshop or a session or even like a retreat all together, and you maybe work on something, it's a completely different animal and completely different vibe. At some point, I like it more. It's going to a concert versus listening to the recording of that concert live a little bit.
That's fair.
Um, but yeah, I actually miss like in-person facilitation a lot now that you mention it.
It is a different vibe. I find it challenging to recreate, right? Especially if people don't turn their cameras on and you can't see if they're paying attention or actually involved. So it is a challenge for sure.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. The turning on the camera thing is a classic, especially when you have a workshop with like 10, 12 people, you probably have 3, 4 cameras off and you have to, hey, let's get together, show your faces. Yeah, it's hard. It's hard. Now, maybe since, I don't know, in different countries it's a different setting, but since companies are maybe going hybrid, you can probably, one day we all go to the office and we can make the most out of that and you can play around. But during COVID, it was like you really had to, give your best to get the energy flowing and to keep the vibe.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, definitely a challenge there.
Check out all my interviews with industry leaders on BlatzChatz.